Hello, and welcome to another episode of Purple Ponderings with Pankaj. Today on our show, we have Bill Jewett from Obsidian Specialty. Bill, before we go any further, would you like to take a couple minutes and just share your background with the audience, a little bit of your story, and also one thing that a lot of people may not know about you?
Yeah, I'll certainly give a shot at my experience, and I'll try to at the same time cogitate one thing people may not know. I've been in the business approximately 40 years, starting in the business with a company called Prudential Re, which was part of Pru Life at the time, was property and casualty reinsurer. Then went back to graduate school and joined a company called, upon graduation, NAC Re, which was a startup reinsurance company focusing on underwriting, treaty underwriting and underwriting management. I was with Zurich Financial Services and various underwriting capabilities for a decade. And in 2002, December, I joined Endurance Specialty to build out their U.S. onshore reinsurance operations. Subsequent to that, I became head of global reinsurance. And when the founder of Endurance Specialty decided to retire, I became president, was on running the insurance and reinsurance businesses, and was on the board of directors. I came up with the idea for Obsidian as a next generation fronting carrier, program fronting carrier, approximately 3.5 years ago. Did that, went through that process, took approximately 2 years, raised capital, formed the company, and currently am CEO and on the board of Obsidian Specialty, which is a non-admitted as well as admitted specialty program carrier, focusing on the U.S. property and specialty space.
Got it. That's a pretty amazing career, Bill. Well, you didn't mention one thing that people may not know about you.
I didn't. I'm a pretty transparent guy. So I really have no secrets, either interesting or uninteresting. But let me continue to cogitate that and circle back.
Yeah. This is the part where it's not about, hey, I had in college, we had this weekend trip and, the stories, adventurous stories that come out of it. This is more about, hey, people may not know, but I am actually an avid skier. I'm a, Ironman runner. I've played golf in, 7 continents, something. So think about that, and we'll get you to come back on that.
All right. I promise I will.
Yeah. So because as a man like you who's been there, done that, traveled the world, would have some aspects to the personality that would have been influenced by some
Sure.
events. But
understood. Yeah.
right. So Bill, let's get right into it. I mean, you've had such an illustrious career, you're most of it around the reinsurance side, treaty side. And I'm pretty curious, what's your perspective on the use of technology, and especially emerging technologies? Because you've seen a lot of them come through and impact the industry. But what's your perspective on the use of these newer technologies on the industry?
I mean, perhaps stating the obvious, it's very impactful and will continue to be even more impactful, from my perspective, both from a distribution perspective, and again, with stating the obvious here, but also from my perspective anyway, as well as from an underwriting and, risk management perspective, and certainly, and also an operational efficiency perspective. So in many ways, and, I think over time you'd call it an evolution, and we're somewhere in the point of, even when we talk about insurtech versus say non-insurtech or traditional carriers, that's becoming increasingly blurred. So we're going from kind of disruption causing an evolution in a way, which ultimately, when you look back in time over that continuum of X number of years, it'll have been a revolution. So you have technologically progressive startups, or insurtechs as it used to be called, or called, coming from one continuum. You have quote unquote traditional carriers from the other continuum, focusing on technological adaptation and the use of technology from both a offensive quote unquote perspective as well as from a defensive perspective, looking at the insurtech. And what I see ultimately over time is no delineation, and the best companies of both, the most insightful, the most that are willing to execute, the ones that understand the business and this evolution and this revolution the best, will be the ones that stand on top, and they will not be defined by insurtech or non-insurtech or traditional, other than the fact of maybe how they began or from whence they came. So
Got it. So that's just pretty interesting observation. But specifically, I wanted to just sort of get your thoughts out, together specifically on, Internet of Things, the smart devices. In our conversations, you've been keenly following sort of how that is evolving as out as well. So just wanted to see how you think that's going to impact both sort of personal lines, commercial lines, or just the overall customer or consumer insured world.
Yeah. I think, on one level, it's, risk mitigation, right? In the sense you want to reduce losses, avoid, if they do occur, actually avoid, incidents from happening, improve safety of individuals, and there's obviously and of, other insurable assets, which obviously has a significant, economic underpinning to it or value to it. And then just think, so all that is just, kind of a to do from the standpoint. It's good to do that, but really it's driven, I think it'll be driven by economic efficiency. So getting to the question, I think, it's almost obvious that these things, these quote unquote things, should be utilized, adapted, incorporated to kind of a holistic risk management, risk transfer approach, reflected in pricing and losses ultimately. So you really are crushing economics, right? Crushing expenses, as long as you do it in an efficient way. I think the biggest challenge, which will, I think, be addressed over time, is making sure that all these risk management mitigation devices are actually implemented and incorporated in kind of the sales of insurance and the application of it to the consumer, commercial, or individual in an efficient way. So they're very easily adaptable. So there's not a friction and there's not a barrier to implementation by, say, this is what you should do, consumer or company, versus this is what we're going to do for you. And what that does is reduce your, say, premium because it will have obviously impact overall on the results of the portfolio, which translates back to the consumer or the buyer. We're not necessarily counting on the actual insured to do those and then assessing 6 months or a year later that, did you do what we told you to do? Because there's a disconnect there. One, you're not going to get 100%, and there's a temporality to it versus saying, an entity saying, we're going to do this for you. And as a result, so here's the cost, one-time cost or a serial cost, is the ongoing cost, if any. And let's set up an appointment and get those things established, either if it's a one appointment or a series of appointments, and not depending on the consumer to do that, consumer of the insurance.
Yeah, kind of making it easy, right? So removing the friction in adoption, I think, is a key component of getting that done. And I think you mentioned a few sort of hurdles along the way, right? Economics needs to work, etc. Of all the things that you see as sort of things that are standing in the way for the adoption of this technology by insurers, one hurdle that needs to be overcome for the insurance industry, the insurers, to make this mainstream.
I think fundamentally, insurance companies have to find a way that if you do this, whether it's commercial or personal lines, these are the net benefits of you economically. Because you talk to a consumer, and it's let's use home as an example. You do this, you do that, it mitigates risk. And so, what does that mean for me? Because if something does happen, I'm going to get the claim paid, even if I do or don't do this. So to have the consumer understand there's a direct economic benefit to doing these and recognize it, and as well as making it easier and efficient for the consumer to do it, is I think going to be critical. Because if there's an indifference to the consumer as far as what premium is paid, whether they do something or not, and it's time consumptive or challenging for the consumer to do it themselves or to find someone to install something, albeit these can be very straightforward devices, but even simple things are difficult to do for some people, whether it's, especially if it involves technology, especially of a specific generation. I think that's a significant hurdle. And to a degree, I find that it's somewhat platitudinal in the sense that people consume that way. Well, I'll do this, but what's in it for me, directly or indirectly, from an economic standpoint?
Yeah, so the value proposition needs to be very clear. And that's something that came out in our research as well, that users, customers, whether it's business or homeowners, they want to know what are they getting in return for them opting in, as
Yeah.
least friction as it may be. So we've heard that loud and clear, and that's one of the sort of the principles that we factored in sort of our approach. But I think you're absolutely right. That's sort of where the industry is today. My perspective is that is the risk transfer aspect and how carriers have done this so far, which is let's just try to predict what's likely to happen but then wait for it to happen. It's like claims centric reactive world that you build the business model around, and that needs to be changed. That has to change a little bit for something like this to work. I would love to ask you, given where you're at, you've seen the technology, from almost going back 40 years. I'm talking about now 80s, the advent of mainframes and AS400s and sort of the client server technology, and there's a lot of technology efficiencies that came in because of all of those evolutions of technology going on to internet and mobile, etc. But a lot of carriers have focused on both back end and front end.
Yeah.
At one point in time, years ago, there was this whole thing about doing business that became a thing, right? How do we make it easier? And for a lot of people, that meant just standing up a website to all the way to
Yeah.
So, which technology do you think made the most impact from, where you, where you sat and what you observed?
Well, I mean, from where I started, in the era of mainframes and punch cards, which some people don't even know what they are. I mean, obviously from a multi-generational standpoint, literally punch cards in huge data rooms. I would say, the most significant thing, if you want to be very fundamental about it, is just raw computing power and what can be done now, on a cell phone, which is probably more significant than what could have been done by some of those mainframes. I mean, which, with 7 people operating them and punching cards and doing what they were doing. So I think it's so on a very base level, I think it's just pure access for companies of all size to have computer power, which wasn't available to the largest companies, back in the slide rule, HP 12C days,
Yeah, that's a good observation. I love that. All right, so we'll switch gears a little bit, Bill, and get on to learning a little bit about you and your personality. So, if I may ask, over this illustrious career, what would you consider was your proudest achievement and also your biggest learning so far?
I would say it's in various stages. I think my proudest achievement was probably getting my first job, literally my first professional job out of college, which was a different era than today, and maybe that's somewhat related to my background, coming from a relatively modest background. And I saw that in itself was a big achievement. And I would say helping, being directly involved in building out and building endurance and specialty into a world-class company over my kind of decade there, was a significant achievement. Just seeing the growth there and what we as a group were able to accomplish. But I think, overall, going through the process that I went through and with a piece of paper and an idea to develop and start Obsidian Specialty, I would say, in seeing that, getting that to the starting line with capital or the finish line, depending on how you look at it, get in business and now being in the market, employing, 19 people, having done 11 transaction, getting an A minus rated, 7 company, again, with 85 million of capital and developing a business literally from scratch. I'd have to say that's, my most significant accomplishment. And also, I think the most, at this stage of my career, the most personally rewarding as far as being able to accomplish that and do that for a lot of reasons, and not specifically related to economic reasons. Just having, again, starting with an idea and making it happen. Now being part of a marketplace, a vibrant marketplace, that's pretty cool, when I think about it. And I don't know if I could have done that without the other experience I've had. So it's kind of a culmination or a crescendo. Right. You just build upon experience.
Got it. So we did hear back about your achievement. What about the learning part, Bill? What would you say?
It's continuous. I would say from a learning perspective, I think a lot of it is, between over the last, 4 decades, I made a fairly deep understanding of how things really worked. And at various stages and experience of life, one thinks they have an understanding. That understanding changes, as your career develops and as you get more responsibility and different responsibilities. And that is, I think, is a result of your experience level and how much you've experienced it. It's a result of your personal experience in the industry and exposure in this over time. And all that's within the context of an industry which is, constantly evolving. And as we discussed earlier, changed so much and evolved on many fronts. So that constant learning and adopting and adapting, I think has been, in some ways rewarding, but also just, probably the most educational over time, and knowing how things worked or at least having thinking one has a better understanding of how things worked anyway, and have a clearer line of sight, whether it's clear or not, maybe clear to,
Right.
clear on an absolute basis, I don't know, but you develop a pretty good point of view of how things work.
Got it. No, absolutely. So, well, someone like you, I'm sure keeps himself up to date by, I don't know, reading, watching, listening. Just wanted to know, are there any publications that you like to read? Anyone that you follow?
I read the Wall Street Journal and the usual business publications as well as the industry publications. I would say I don't follow individuals as much, at least those that I would follow or are interested in or in the press anyway. So I see them anecdotally without having to follow them directly vis-a-vis social media. As far in I do read quite a bit from both from recreationally, but that's more of a not an avocation, but more just again recreational reading. But I really do like studying companies in the industry. I do that on a pointed basis, which involves studying individuals to a degree and following companies that way. So I do follow companies. I really put a lot of effort into understanding what our competitors doing, and really also put a lot of effort into understanding the culture of different companies, employees. And one thing I was remiss at not mentioning before, as far as what I've learned or some takeaways of my career, is we talk about a lot of different things: technology, we talk about sourcing, we talked about strategy, involved, those sorts of things, all very real, developing a company. But it really comes down to, I think, from my perspective anyway, is the common factor that still exists for me is having maybe different types, but surrounding oneself with quality people or being part of a team that is a high quality team. Because without the right individuals, whatever those right individuals, their skill sets might be, if they're not top quality, the chance of success, even with serendipitous, even with luck, is certainly over time remote and probably non-sustainable. So it really does form a culture that attracts those type of people, and that'll lead to future. That at least gives you a pretty good line of sight on, or certainly increases your probability of success.
Got it. If you were to listen to this podcast in the future, is there someone that you think we should be getting in front of or up inviting to our podcast, like that you'd be interested in?
This specific one, or your podcast specifically? Just anyone you do? Yeah. I would sincerely encourage, just based on my experience and in knowing you and what you're doing, that I would say both reinsurers and insurers, MGAs could certainly benefit, from spending. And I don't know if they look at each and every one, but I know everyone's time is valuable. But I think they'd be remiss if if they didn't recognize. Well, let me put it this way: I think they would find a lot of value, could find a lot of potential value in a lot of discussions you've been having, and hopefully in this one, and insights. Because I like, I always find it refreshing to get points of view from other people in the industry, how they're thinking about it, which maybe it's even more valuable if they're divergent from my points of view on subjects, because it gives you context, it gives you how other people are thinking about things. Because no one, I don't think, is omniscient. I certainly know I'm not, but some people think they are, but they're not. You get benefit from having the kind of the collective wisdom or thoughts.
Got it. Well, with that, we come to the last segment of this podcast. Bill, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I'm going to give you two choices. And what you have to do is you have to pick a choice and tell us why you picked that choice. Okay?
Okay.
All right, let's start with the easy one. So baseball or football?
Football. The action, the environment, and I would say baseball was a close second, but it's laborious. It's too much downtime. Football has a significant amount of downtime. If you look at the length of a game, in relative to the actual action of a plays, the remote, but you feel like you're constantly engaged, and baseball is just a slower game. Though I think they're both wonderful games and part of the American fabric, and I hope they continue to be.
Got it. Got it. Superman or Spiderman?
Oh, Superman. I especially George Reeves, the original Superman on black and white TV back in the 50s. So I gotta go with Superman. And he'd kick his ass too. So
Golf or tennis?
golf. I am a recreational golfer, average golfer, terrible tennis player. I played neither when I was, in my, neither growing up. But I really enjoy golf and being outside, and it's something that I just prefer more than tennis. And now, if I chose to play tennis now, I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, be giving my experience. Let's put it that way.
Well, you and I both love golf. I'm a big passionate golfer as well, and I believe that. But I also believe that you should not confuse passion with talent.
No,
Just
that's
because
exactly right.
Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm
And
going.
I always look at golf, especially if you're, with a friend or a child. It's a great way to spend with people you like, people you love, 4 hours. And sometimes in our space, it's difficult to get 4 hours with a friend or with a child who plays of alone time in a way. We can actually talk and walk.
Yeah.
So that's a value I place on it, not only just hitting the ball.
Right. Paper books or ebooks?
I'm a paper guy. I always have been. I still read, newspapers with the same content. I know it's not eco-friendly, but they're still available. I just really enjoy sitting down with a paper and a cup of coffee and reading a paper, which, certainly my children can't relate to, but it's just, again, maybe it's a habit, but I just enjoy it. And as well as a book,
And the final one is choice of vacation, a place like Iceland or something like Hawaii.
No, that's a tough one. That's tough. I would say Iceland because one, I've never been there, and two, I think it's from what I hear and read, it's different than any other place in the world. Which one could argue Hawaii is also, but if I went to Hawaii, that to me, I would consider that kind of a beach vacation and beach water vacation, which you can get elements of that obviously in other beautiful locations in the Pacific and even in tropical Atlantic. Where Iceland just seems like a very unique place, which I otherwise wouldn't go. So if I had to take a special trip, I would probably choose Iceland. Though on one side of me would say I'd have a I think I'd have a more enjoyable time in Hawaii, but a much more interesting and maybe I don't know what kind of experience I had, which is maybe why I'd go, Iceland instead.
Okay. Adventurous. Adventure into the unknown. I've been to both the places. They're both very different. They both lovely.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, Bill. With that, we come to the end of this podcast. Any final words of advice that you want to share before we wrap up?
I would say two things. One, anyone, I highly encourage people to be very entrepreneurial, like yourself, as well as I guess myself when I started, the process of forming Obsidian. It's a wonderful experience. If it's something that is within your wheelhouse and you want to spend your time doing that, I just find it very personally rewarding. I think other people would too. And also there's a risk involved, so it's about risk tolerances. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that, in my discussions with you previously and what you're doing, I would advise people to take a very hard look at what you're doing, engage with you personally in Purple Ant, and see how that can optimize their business. And even if it's not directly related to what they may be doing in the insurance space or applicable, I think just how you thought about it and how you're thinking and how thoughtful you are about the process. I think there's a lot to be learned there just from a discussion with you. So I'd encourage people to do that. That would be one point of view, because I know I enjoyed my time with you and will continue to do so, even though we may not ever formally engage. We may, but I always walk away, I think I'm more informed and enlightened in some ways, and hope you feel something similar that way, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those. Thank you for that, compliments and suggestions, and hope there are others, who are gonna execute on that. But on that note, Bill, we come to an end to this podcast. thank you for being such a wonderful guest. So with that, signing off now, and we will be back very soon with another episode of Purple Ponderings with Pankaj. Thank you.
Great speaking with you.